I guess we're going to get started here on today's webinar. My name is Niall Malloy. I will be moderating this session with our two colleagues and speakers. And I'm the Senior Program Manager at Neighborhood Funders Group. And today's conversation is going to be connected to looking at governance, participatory budgeting, and grant making. So before we get into it, just going to have a couple of housekeeping things. One, you can see in the chat box, just make sure you sync your audio to the video. We're going to also try to make it a feedback loop, so more communication if possible. But many of you see that in the corner, there's an I button, so make sure you just click that and fill out the proper steps around that. And then also just keep your phone on mute, and that would allow the conversation to go move forward. But I'm really excited about this conversation, as there's been a lot of discussion within NFG within the program that I'm managing called the Democratizing Development Program, which is a newer program that launched at NFG's conference back in June, which primarily is looking at the intersection between the built environment, economic development, and communities really playing a very key role in that process. So having our two speakers really will currently excel some of the conversations that we've been having, particularly around looking at the role of participatory processes in terms of resource sharing, in terms of budgeting, and the role of community being engaged in these processes. So let me do a quick round of introductions real quick. The first speaker, we have two speakers. First speaker is Josh Lerner. He is the Executive Director at the Participatory Budgeting Project. He has over 15 years experience developing, researching, and working with leading communities on engagement programs across North America, Latin America, and Europe. His work on participatory budgeting has been recognized by the White House as a model for open government and by the Brown Democracy Medal as the best practical innovation advancing democracy around the world. So he's going to be one of our speakers, really talking about and lifting up some of the work that they've been doing within their project. And the other speaker is Tyler Nickerson. He runs the Solutions Project, where he accelerates the transition of 100% clean, renewable energy for all people and purposes. And to achieve this mission, they engage the public, celebrate and convene leaders, and advance partnerships and policies that make strides on the road to 100% renewable. They have a very interesting program with an integrated model at the state level, but also engaging the leadership and making decisions around some of these work and amplifying voices and stories in the media. So both of these speakers really are going to begin to have an open conversation primarily around some of the core interests in the work around participatory budgeting and participatory sharing of resources. Before they jump in, I just want to give a little pivot. This conversation is linked to some of the work that we've been doing at NFG, which links to our 3-year outcomes of the Democratizing Development Program, where the 5 outcomes, we are working towards that. So this conversation, outcome 1, a national network of funders and field leaders, building deep relationships and knowledge. Outcome 2, more of our NFG members and other constituencies to be engaged in democratic efforts, democratizing efforts throughout the country, and also lifting up the work that's already moving forward. Number 3, developing a organizing fund, a national fund supporting funder alliances and organizing work to advance democratizing development, community development efforts, connecting with our members and being thought leaders, and then finally ensuring and supporting place-based and other initiatives around community-centered philanthropy. So this conversation is really linked to building out some of our initial conversations where we're thinking about the outcome number 3 around a national fund and what is the role of participatory processes, structures, decision-making, and others to begin to kind of start shaping that work. So to get the conversation going, I'm actually going to go to our 2 speakers to Before I just realized too, we had another speaker who was unable to make it, Matt Hart. He gave us an email earlier that he's unable to make it because of a family emergency. But some of his work around who decides, and I think most of you got the link to that report. We'll be following up with you about that to share that more information with you all. But in general, his work has been really interesting around the role of philanthropy and participatory decision-making around funding and grant dollars. And so we will circulate that money resource with you, but unfortunately he was unable to join us. So the current question that we wanted to begin with the two speakers, and then we're going to do a deeper dive, is, we know that participatory resource sharing, public and philanthropic resources is not relatively new. Many funders are supporting various participatory budgeting strategies. And in our current kind of political moment, some of the challenges that we're hearing in national election season around divisiveness, race, all these other dynamics, I just wanted to ask the speakers, why is participatory and community-involved resource sharing important to you and your work? So I want to start with that, and I want to begin the conversation with Josh.
Okay, thanks so much, Niall. We're excited to be on this call. I've worked with a bunch of folks from NFG in the past, and maybe some people on the call as well. And really eager to explore how this tool can be used for and with foundations. So again, my name is Josh Lerner, Executive Director of the Participatory Budgeting Project, and we're a nonprofit that works across the U.S. and Canada to empower people to decide how to spend public money. And I'll talk a bit more about participatory budgeting later on. I guess just to start with Niall's question, what we hear a lot is that folks are frustrated with the political establishment. They're frustrated with how government and politics is working, and often are opting out, whether it's through not participating, whether it's through conflict with government, and looking for a better way to decide, together, a better way to do government. A lot of the energy that we've seen across the country around participatory budgeting is from folks seeing an opportunity to change not just who's elected and what policies are advanced, but actually to change how we decide, to change how government is run and what the role of the average person can be in that process, and especially to lift up folks who normally don't have much access to power. So I think at this moment especially, where there's a lot of frustration with the system, there's a need for alternatives, that people are really interested in opening up government, making it more participatory, and participatory budgeting, or PB, has been the most widespread approach to that around the world. So actually I want to just start off with a quick story just to illustrate how this works and what it looks like on the ground. And let's see if I can scroll down. So I want to tell a story about a woman named Rose, and there she is. So Rose is a young woman in Harlem, in New York, 19 years old, and she got involved in a community organization called Brotherhood Sister Soul. And they do organizing with young people especially. They have a hip-hop workshop, they do a writing program, and they have a community garden as well. And Rose got involved in their community garden. And it's an entirely youth-run community garden. Young people plant the vegetables, they harvest them, they help sell them, and this is in an area where there's not a ton of fresh produce. So it's both providing fresh produce to the community, it's kind of youth employment and youth engagement activity, it's a leadership development program. So they've been really excited about it, and Rose heard about this opportunity through the city government to get funding for their garden, their program, and came forward at one of the participatory budgeting assemblies with this idea of improving the garden, brainstormed some options with folks, developed a proposal for a new greenhouse. So they could extend the life of the garden year-round. They could have events in it. They could produce healthy foods for the community and have more youth engagement opportunities throughout the year. So she developed this proposal, worked in a committee with other folks across the district who had other ideas for youth engagement, for housing, for education, and put together a proposal, which you can actually see a picture of here, This is a poster board in the background and a 3D model of the community garden, and got it to go on a ballot in her district for participatory budgeting. So in her district and many in New York, there's at least $1 million on the table for folks to decide how to spend. And so she put on the ballot, did a lot of organizing, getting the word out, letting folks know about both this proposal and the process more broadly, mobilized folks to vote. People came out to vote, and she was able to win funding, actually, for a project, $50,000 from the city government to build a new greenhouse on some public housing land, actually, and is now moving forward with the proposal. And so we profiled her as one of the leaders of this, but also to look into what she learned and what she gained from this process. And so there's a quote here, we knew about grants before, but this was different. Everyone participated and pitched their ideas for what they wanted to see. People saw how passionate we were, and from that, we were able to implement our project. So I share this story to illustrate partly how folks can participate on the ground in a very different way, deciding how to spend resources, and what this process can do to connect with existing organizing efforts. Unfortunately, that's not really the case for most Americans. So for most people, this is a much more common sentiment that, the Pew Research Center reported that just 19% of Americans say the government is run for the benefit of all. So the vast majority of people think the government isn't for them. It's not in their interest, and they don't really see a way in. What participatory budgeting does is it gives people the opportunity to directly decide how to spend part of a public budget. So not a consultation, but actually giving people real power over a real pot of money. The way it generally works is that folks design the process, put together the rules. The steering committee usually develops a plan for the process, and then they go out into the community to brainstorm ideas, see what people want to improve in their neighborhoods, and then turn those ideas into concrete proposals, get them vetted by city staff, see if they're technically feasible, get a cost estimate for them, and come back to the community, have a public vote, and the projects that get the most votes get funded and are implemented. So that's the process in a nutshell, and I think later I'll go into some more examples and also talk about how this can be used at foundations and by foundations.
Great, thanks for that, Josh. Let's actually go to Tyler. Maybe you can respond to the question, primarily looking at why is participatory community-involved resource sharing important to you in your work?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be with you all. And just a kind of quick note, I appreciated the promotion, Niall, you gave me. Unfortunately, I don't have the pleasure of running the Solutions Project. That's the role of our executive director, Sarah Shanley Hope. I merely oversee our grant making. So I do appreciate that promotion, though. That's welcomed.
Great for that distinction. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a small but important one. And I'm actually really excited to have this conversation. I think for us at the Solutions Project, we see this as one of the most interesting growth edges within philanthropy right now. The notion of how we open up our grant-making process, which is really the heart and soul of the work in many ways, but the process to move money, how we open that up, that allows us to take further risks, to think differently about the work, and I'm excited to share our model and our questions, because we certainly have a lot of them. From my perspective, I come from a lineage of this type of grant making. After being in the community organizing space or being a community organizer and serving in the policy space, I joined a family foundation, which was my first job in philanthropy, and it was a private foundation that the founder had created what he called a contributions committee, which was he was able to really have great input from the community leaders on where the grant should go. And of course, he was the final decision maker as the chair of the board, but I can't remember in the 45 years of the foundation's history any one time that he went against that contributions committee. So to think about philanthropy in a more open space beyond just how we've typically seen it in the past is certainly core to my work and core to the passions I hold as a grant maker and a funder. And I would say that particularly in this moment of disconnection and real distrust for the political establishment, that this is, I think, a moment for philanthropy to kind of walk the walk, or at least walk its talk, and really open up to itself to making stronger decisions, to thinking about the outcomes in a much more impactful way. But, you know, and those are the traditional arguments we've heard for this type of grant making, or thinking about grant making in a more democratized way. But I actually want to push the conversation a little bit further. I want to make the suggestion that a greater democracy within our philanthropic sector actually will reach to our core and deepest values. That when we hold equity as a core to this work, as a core lens, both for our internal cultures as philanthropic organizations, but the grant making that we're doing, that we have the opportunity to make the movements that lead to social change instead of standing in the way. And oftentimes, as we know, that philanthropy doesn't always reach its unique role and its unique potential as a true source of risk and encouragement for the communities that I know that we all care about. And so I'm excited that so many other funders are thinking about this, thinking about ways that, you know, big or small, and we'll talk a little bit about our journey, but big or small can open up the door to have more input into how decisions are made and what decisions are made for grants, and that we're seeing, you know, the opportunities for program staff and director staff in many institutions across the country to find new fulfillment in their work. We have, you know, a problem in our sector around retention, particularly for, you know, my colleagues of color, and what it means to really make impact in the communities that they want to drive change in, that we all want to be driving change in. And, you know, so for me, this process is about talent retention. It's about making our sector stronger. And yeah, so I'm excited to talk more. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for both of your comments. And Tyler is a relatively new member at NFG. I think I asked him to join the call before he actually went through the member orientation. So that's great. Thanks for jumping in there. And I just want to encourage others to a part of our network. You know, this webinar is a part of a series of conversations we want to start having, you know, as NFG's Democratizing Development Program is also merging with our place-based working group program. There's so much great information that we want to begin to share. So I just want to encourage those that are on the call thinking about strategic ways that we can start profiling some of that work as we move forward. And this is kind of one conversation starting some of the participatory democracy relationships that we want to see build out in the program, but also lifting up some of these examples. And so I wanted to kind of pivot a little bit before we do a deeper dive with our two presentations. Both Tyler and Josh will go a little bit deeper, but I wanted to kind of open up to folks that are on the call. You know, one of the things that I want to see more is a little bit more interactivity in webinar spaces. You know, they're more very presentation heavy. So in this little section right here, I just want to kind of put the question back to a few people on the call, if there's anyone who feel interested to share a little bit more about the work that you've been doing around participatory budgeting, or looking through this idea around participatory decision-making around resources. And so I just wanted to take like a few minutes just to see if there's anyone on the call who would be willing to share a little bit of their insights or perspectives on that. And I'll just wait a few seconds and then see if we have. You can raise a hand. You can also unmute yourself, and just let me know that's going to happen. And if there's not any comments, we're going to move forward. But I just want to at least have that opening for people if they have any comments or perspectives on this. Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, we hope that if you weren't able, there's also a chat box there. There's also a symbol if you want to raise your hand. Towards the end of the call, we're also going to open up back for discussion too. So I just want to encourage people to start thinking about some thoughts as we're hearing the presentations, more or less, how are you thinking about this work? And also, how are you seeing it in the places in which you invest in? So moving forward, if there's no direct questions, we can actually go directly into our presentation, which is going to be, we're going to start off with Josh. Just go a little bit deeper about the participatory budgeting process, the structure, which we think, for public resources, also private resources, like the structure, the decision-making processes, really talk a little bit more about some of that work as we move forward. Somehow it looked like we lost our presentation. So bear with us. We have a little technical difficulty here. And then we go into the slide. And Josh, you can just start, and then we, once the slide deck reload, we can use it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and actually, no worries. Actually, I wanted to build on something that Tyler was saying as well. And I think for me, a lot of this work is, about strengthening your community, but also more broadly understanding what that community is. And so one thing that we see with participatory budgeting is that there's a lot of processes that cities and institutions use to consult with folks or get input or to have boards or commissions, which extends the decision-making and discussion a bit broader into maybe a committee. And what we're trying to push for is to extend that broader beyond just a committee, beyond just a handful of people in a room, and see how can you actually engage a wide range of stakeholders, anyone in the community, especially folks who normally don't have a say in making real decisions. And so I think that's one of the challenges and opportunities, I think, for grant makers as well, is thinking about how can you take that participatory grant making one step further beyond a committee and engaging more of the stakeholders directly in the work. And what we see is that when folks are engaged in decision making, they learn more, they invest more, they put more into the work. So it's a way to actually build a lot more engagement and energy around what you're doing if you do it well. Great. Looks like this is back up now. So I wanted to step back a little bit, actually. So left off with some of the problems I both Niall and I were talking about as far as the moment of distrust, people not wanting to engage with government or decision makers, not feeling that they're being listened to. And a lot of our work, we try to redesign the democratic process so that people have more of a place. And a big part of that for me is recognizing what are the problems with how things work now. So for a lot of participatory processes, one of the key problems that we hear is that it's painful for folks. So this is what a lot of people envision when they think about community meetings, is someone yelling, whether that's someone in the community yelling at a staff person or elected official or at each other. They think of divisiveness. They think of the current divides that we have in this country. And a lot of folks don't want to be in that room and don't want to participate in that kind of context. They have lots of things they could do with their evening, and this is not one of the more appealing ones. So how can we make participation less painful for people? Another big problem, as we're well aware, is that participation is unequal. So the voices that speak up at public meetings and participatory processes are disproportionately white, more affluent, more educated, older, and so that's who policymakers hear from. And that if we don't recognize that we're not going to be having an inclusive process. And a third big thing that we hear is that participation often is powerless. This is an old French student poster. It says, I participate, you participate, he participates, we participate, you all participate. They decide. And people aren't stupid. They recognize that a lot of decisions have been made behind closed doors before they're invited into the discussion. And they don't want to participate if they know it's not going to have a real impact. What difference is it going to make in their lives if it's already been decided beforehand? So what we try and do is to address these is to redesign democracy for more empowered participation so that instead of being expert-centered, it's participant-centered. Usually we start out thinking, what do we need from participation? So whether you're a staff or official, you think, what do I want? And we really encourage you to think about, what do participants want? What are the people that you're trying to engage? What do they want? What are their aspirations? What are their goals? And what would make it a good experience for them? These are a couple of photos. The one on the left, there's a kind of expert at the front of the room presenting, people standing, sitting, passively listening. The one on the right is a community expo in New York around participatory budgeting, where there's neighbor talking to neighbor, there's food, there's drinks, there's visuals, there's discussion, there's also childcare. You can think about which event would you rather be at, which one would you rather stick around for. And we see that folks on the left don't tend to stick around, don't want to come back as much as if you invite them out to something that they actually want to participate in that's enjoyable. So I want to talk a bit about how PB, participatory budgeting, works on the ground. There's a video that I won't show here, but I recommend that folks look at it afterwards. It's a quick snapshot of how this looks like on the ground, which you can see on our website at participatorybudgeting.org. And the video talks about some of the work across the country. Right now there are around 20 processes across the U.S. and Canada, and many times more cities that are organizing around participatory budgeting. This takes place in a wide range of budgets. So mostly it's been at the city level or even district level, but also there's been interest in counties, state budgets. Internationally, there have been experiences with these. Discretionary funds of elected officials, housing authorities or other public agency budgets, schools, school districts, university budgets, federal funds. We've been working with the White House and HUD in particular on community development block grants, another federal funding that goes out to local authorities, community benefit agreements, tax increment financing, and then non-government sources like foundations or nonprofit budgets that are community-oriented. So I want to go through a few examples of what's been happening so far. So the first citywide process was in Vallejo, California, which is a small city around 117,000 in the Bay Area. Some of you might know it. It was, for a while, the largest city in the U.S. to go bankrupt. That honor has now been held by other cities since then, unfortunately. And the city launched a PB process with part of a new sales tax revenues. It was for around $3.2 million the first year for programs and capital projects. And it's been going on since then. It's now in its fourth year. The biggest process in the U.S. is in New York City, where this past year there were around $38 million allocated across around half the city. It's a district-level process there. There's 51 of 51 districts are participating now, and almost 70,000 people participated and funded 132 projects. And this is being coordinated right now by the City Council Speaker's Office, Melissa Mark-Viverito, and is the largest process in North America, one of the largest in the world. It didn't start out this big. So it started out as a pretty small process that was funded mainly by actually some of the NFG members and has grown a lot since then. As one measure of growth, I have to include an obligatory picture of my son. This is the one on the left. When he was born, he could fit in the ballot box the first year. And now he's thinking of project ideas already. And this is at one of the expos last year, and he's working on getting it for his elementary school now, so he can decide to spend some of his elementary school budget. In Boston, there's a youth-only process. It's run out of the mayor's office. We're also launching a similar process in Baltimore now, with City Council. And so there, actually, if you're over 25, you get carded and you can't vote. So it's only for youth ages 12 to 25 decided to spend $1 million from the city budget. Universities have also been using this. Palo Alto College in Texas has been using participatory budgeting for both students and faculty and staff. In New York, CUNY has a few PB processes for students. In Toronto, the Public Housing Authority has been using PB. Each year, up to 6,000 tenants are deciding how to spend $5 to $9 million on capital improvements for their buildings. We've been working on launching a process in New York as well at the Housing Authority. So I'll talk a bit about the impacts of this work, and I think some of the things that you can look to see if you engage people in budget decision making. One main thing that a lot of our funders lift up is that it's a way to have broader and more active civic participation beyond the folks who already participate and beyond the relatively shallow ways of participation that most folks are used to of just coming out to vote in elections every couple years. This picture here is actually a family where the entire family, it was their first time in their lives voting. They're immigrants, and in participatory budgeting, you don't have to be a citizen, you don't have to even be documented to vote. And so for them, they haven't been able to vote in their home country before, and in the U.S., they haven't been able to vote. And so for them, this is an entry point into civic engagement, political engagement. And we see this across the board that people who normally don't participate in elections do participate if you open up these other opportunities for them to engage. So in Vallejo, we saw that 20% of the PB voters were ineligible to vote in regular elections. So whether because of citizenship status, because of age, the voting age has been lower in PB. Formerly incarcerated individuals are also able to vote, unlike in many other elections. In New York, we've seen that a higher percentage of low-income residents voted in PB compared to the full population in local elections. And this is largely through live targeted outreach and engagement, which has been foundation funded. Second big thing that we see is funders using PB as a way to build more healthy communities. And California Endowment has been a real leader in this, supporting this work for several years in several cities in California. The idea that a healthy community is one that actively participates, where people are engaged in decision-making, where they can make their voices heard, where they can connect with their neighbors, and shape the environment they live in. In Boston, this has been young people who have been managing the city budget. Elsewhere, it's been other communities. What we see is that folks who participate learn a lot through the process. It functions as a kind of leadership development process, people learning by doing. So people report increased skills in public speaking, negotiating, building agreements, contacting officials. They're more likely to go to community meetings afterwards, to speak up at community meetings. And so for a lot of folks, this is a way to get them more engaged in the process if you start by meeting them where they're at and start by asking them, what do they want to see on their block, on their walk to school or work, or in their local park. And once they start to engage with that, then they level up their engagement and participate in other ways. And then the last big thing that we hear as far as impact is that this is a way to have more systemic impact on having effective and fair government. So actually changing policymaking, changing decision-making processes and structures for the long term, and opening up government to people who normally don't have a say to be at the table in really structured ways. And we've seen that participants tend to be more from low-income, marginalized communities. Funding has been going to low-income and marginalized communities. That a lot of policy changes have come out of participatory budgeting. So, for example, in New York, one of the issues that came up a lot was school bathroom repairs, which wasn't really on the political agenda beforehand. But a lot of school bathrooms don't get much funding, and so people were coming up with projects to put doors on the stalls of bathrooms. There are bathrooms in elementary schools where the stalls had no doors. The kids weren't using the bathrooms all day. They were afraid to be there. And this kept winning funding, and a lot of folks asked, why isn't this just done anyway? And it's a totally valid question, but it wasn't being funded anyway. This put it on the agenda. It became more of a hot-button issue to the point where council was pressured to act. Council started lobbying the Department of Education and doubled the amount of funding across the board for school bathroom repairs, getting $50 million more for them. And so we see this time and time again where issues that aren't brought up by the usual suspects do surface through this and lead to broader policy changes. For officials, it also can be very helpful for them. This is a city council member in New York, Carlos Menchaca, and for him, PB brings new people into a leadership relationship with government and actually helps to teach government how to operate better. Not all officials take this mindset. A lot of them we hear from that they think they were elected to decide and that's their power. They're not giving it up. We find that that's decreasingly the case, and that the newer generation of officials see their role more as making the community better. And if this is a tool to improve the community, they want to take it on. They want to leave a legacy and have an impact. And this is a way for them to connect with a broader constituency. I want to mention it quickly before talking about how this can work at foundations, some of the broader efforts this has been connected to. And It's been really used as a tool for other efforts, whether the White House, which is using it for their open government and transparency programs, to Black Lives Matter, which lifted up PB as a strategy for community control in its recent Movement for Black Lives platform, to Resilience, Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities program, participatory economic transformation. So we hope this can be a tool for funders as well and for other organizations that you may work with. I just want to wrap up by talking a bit about what this looks like for organizations and potentially for funders. So how can you apply this to private funding? And I'll share an example actually from our own organization. So we practice what we preach, and we use participatory budgeting for our own budget. This is a picture here of the voting at our benefit. And we have a process that we call PB squared, so PB for PB, where we ask all of our donors to vote to decide how to spend a portion of the donations. So half the donations each year we set aside for this process and ask people to come up with ideas, to develop them into projects, and to vote to decide what we do as an organization. And so some ideas that have come up in the past, for example, I'll go into in a minute, just a bit of background on us to put this in context. So we've been around for around 5 years. We work across the country, and so through this process, we encourage folks to think of things that are relevant not just for one city, but for multiple locations. So again, getting people to think beyond their starting point and where they're at. And we have 3 programs that we ask for ideas for. So one is around technical assistance. So what tools or what support do governments need or institutions need to carry out participatory budgeting well? Second is participation lab. So what tools can be useful on the ground, whether it's tech tools, videos, games, trainings. And then the third is network building. So what are ways that we can bring people together to learn more from each other? So some ideas that have come up, for example, there is a proposal for a training video on how to develop proposals in PB, so how to put forward proposals like for that community garden, greenhouse. And this is funded. We actually just released this video. Toolkits, like a toolkit for organizing marginalized communities in PB, so something we can give to city officials and staff to help them to do better outreach and engagement, folks who may not have as much experience with that. And each year people vote and decide how to spend the funds. We find that it gets people much more engaged in our work. They understand what we do. We get lots of great ideas through the process. It helps keep us accountable and make sure that we actually move these projects out and make them happen. And it contributes to work on the ground. So we've been really excited about this, and we'd love to talk more about the mechanics if folks are interested. And I just want to close, I guess, with the kind of the bigger vision that we have, and that I hope that you all can help to move forward, which is really for people to be able to decide how their money is spent, their public money is spent across the board, whether that's in their schools, their universities, their cities, the federal government. Resources that people contribute to, they pay taxes. We think they should be able to decide how they're spent. And that's by engaging people in decision-making, you develop their skills, you learn a ton from the process, and we think that you function better. We've seen pretty good impact of this so far. So I will wrap up there with my contact info here, and I can share some more information after the call as well. So look forward to talking with folks more.
Thanks, Josh. I think for those that are on the call, I think in terms of like the structure and the model, I just wanted to see if you can talk a little bit more like how the decision-making process happening in one of these places, like in terms of like the 1, 2, 3 steps. Just real quick, just kind of walk through an example, like even like in a New York example, just how that process went in terms of how those decisions made.
Sure, for a city process, you mean?
Yeah, for a city process, as an example.
Yeah. So New York is a good example because the process is happening right now. So in the spring and summer, there's a steering committee of nonprofits and community groups and city staff and officials who redesigned the process, made some rule changes for this year to improve from last year. Then they rolled that out in August for ideas, so collecting ideas. so hosting neighborhood assemblies in different neighborhoods across the city. There was an online platform where folks could submit ideas, comment on them, share them. Staff went out to community events, to organizations, to schools, places of worship, places where folks are already convened, and had discussions there about what folks wanted to see. Again, providing them with enough basic information to start that they could have an informed discussion. So you're not totally blue skying it. It's more of saying, here's the money on the table, here's what's eligible. Based on that, what do you want done? And then at the end of those meetings, asking folks to step up to sign up as budget delegates. So they're basically volunteers that take on the additional work to turn those ideas into reality. And so recognizing that just having an idea at a meeting doesn't make it doable, and we can't ask everyone to show up all the time to put in all the work to make that possible. So we delegate some of that work to a smaller subset of people, volunteers, who will take those ideas and go out and do research, do site visits, visit different schools, parks in the district, meet with technical experts and city staff to figure out what's being done already, what's in the works, how much do things cost, what's feasible. And then based on that, whittle down the ideas into the top priority ones that can go on a ballot. We have some equity criteria that we try and get them to use as well to consider what are what communities does the project benefit, how can we put projects on the ballot that most address the greatest community needs. And then there's voting for around a week across the city. And that in some places looks like typical voting events where you may have voting in a school or community center. We really encourage, though, to bring the vote to the people and to go where people are. So you also will see voting. Actually, this picture here is on a busy street in front of a supermarket. And so folks who don't know about participatory budgeting, don't know much about government necessarily, but do buy groceries, are introduced to this process, and we say, do you have 5 minutes to vote to improve your community? And this has been really effective for engaging people who aren't really connected and making the process more inclusive and diverse. And then the winning projects, the ones that can be funded and with the pot of money available, they get the most votes, are then directly inserted into the city budget and then get implemented over the next few years. Unfortunately, they have to work with the same procurement process and implementation process as any other project, so it can take a few years to get things done. But they do move forward, and we've seen that in a lot of cases they move forward more quickly because there's more folks pushing. There's people who are looking for this project to come out and asking questions if it's not moving forward, and having a better sense of who to ask and how to put pressure on government to make things happen.
Great. Yeah, I just thought it would be good to walk through as we're thinking about different things in the program itself, so thanks for that. I'm actually going to move forward in the conversation just to jump to Tyler, then we can circle back towards the end of the call for if there's any additional questions or comments that need to be made. So Tyler, we just can start with your presentation. Thanks, Josh.
Great, thank you so much. And Josh, it's good to hear of that work and see even a few of our partners and grantees as folks who are adopting this. As I scroll through the slides, is that showing up for everyone?
Yes.
Perfect, okay. I wanted to make sure it just wasn't on my computer. Well, thanks again, and I'm excited to kind of talk about our model thus far as a new grant maker, and both with some unique structural components, but also, actively learning the lessons of this work and trying to understand, how we can constantly be thinking about our resources, more so the flow of the resources differently. Just as a brief overview to the Solutions Project, we were formally launched in 2015. Our founders are, mostly celebrities, a scientist and a banker, which, they're powerful in their own right, but together they've come on to take this bold challenge of transitioning our country to 100% clean energy for 100% of the people. And I think it's that last part of our mission that is so core to the work. I know that's how I personally come to it, is I almost stumble through the mission backwards, because this is first and foremost about a just transition for everyone, but including, and most importantly, those on the front line of climate change to get to what can be a new clean economy. And we really see that work happening, or we have that work happening in our organization two main streams. The first is a 100% campaign that is utilizing our celebrity founders and other celebrities to amplify the voices of the front lines, amplify the great work that's going on around energy, which is an otherwise kind of wonky issue that's tough to understand. We're hoping to bring new people into that conversation and spread the word. The best example is actually Mark Ruffalo is with Reverend Jesse Jackson today on the front line in North Dakota at the Standing Rock camp regarding the Dakota Access Pipeline. And so we're there with media and others trying to bring awareness to these issues. The second body of work for us is that we're a grant maker, funding in the climate justice and clean energy space. And really what we see our role being in the field is both leveraging media and leveraging money for those who haven't had a voice in this work before, who haven't seen themselves in this. And quite frankly, we're not winning without them. And so it's really, really important that we start to think about this work differently. And that is how we have our grant making is really built on a foundation of kind of trusting relationships and really putting the grantee first in the work in a lot of ways and trying to find more and better opportunities to do so. A little bit of an overview specifically about our grant making as kind of context for the rest of the discussion. You know, we first and foremost support power building work, so community organizing, leadership development, policy change work. We also support community-owned renewable solutions and just transition strategies, and that's kind of our space. We do that through rapid response grant making, through general operating support, and supporting the infrastructure of our movement, which is so critical as well. So we're trying to be responsive, we're trying to think ahead, and trying to build the body of work for this movement. We are funding in U.S., Canada, and Mexico with a specific interest in New York, California, Iowa, and the American South, which is where I'm joining you all today in the middle of a site visit to North and South Carolina over the next couple of days. So our first attempt into this work, knowing that as staff and really as our board, we couldn't make all these decisions ourselves, was to bring in what we call a cross-class giving circle. And this was a group of folks who, you know, are going to help us make our decisions both from philanthropy and from the movement. But really, I just want to note as I kind of bring up our governance structure as a model that that's on its way to a path of greater democratic influence. Like that was a first step, and we're still trying to hone that step, but how do we even think about this work in a lot more robust ways? And I'm excited to share some early thinking. I should also note that one of a close friend of NFG's and someone who's been active in this work for a long time, Jason Franklin, at the Johnson Center for Philanthropy at my alma mater, Grand Valley State University, has really inspired me and many others in the field to be thinking about the democratization of philanthropy. And certainly his work has influenced and sparked my thinking as well. So I certainly want to give him some credit there. So I changed the slide here to look at our model. And we have our board of directors, which our founders sit on, and are certainly the fiduciaries and those responsible to the organization. And we are technically a pooled fund, so we've got investors from a number of institutions and individuals making contributions to our grant-making funds. Mostly our investors come from the Silicon Valley tech space and celebrities. Leonardo DiCaprio is in many ways a co-founder of this organization, has been a huge supporter of this work. But our grant decisions are made by what we call our leadership fund committee. And in many ways, this is our trustees. These serve as the decision makers, the proposal reviewers, hopefully, and even more so, the strategic guidance that as an organization we need to really make good decisions. And that group is where the cross-class giving system is kind of set up. So we have, of a group of 8, we have 4 folks from philanthropy and 4 folks from the movement, including one of our grantees. And so they all have an equal say, an equal vote on that committee. And so that's been our first step, with already some lessons learned in trying to kind of open up the decision-making process. And I can't tell you how valuable enriched those discussions are about the proposals, both hearing from different sides of the work here. We also have what we call a referral network for our rapid response grants. Those grants are made by staff, but we have a network of movement folks who have a direct connection to the grant-making process and are able to help fast-track viable proposals and proposals that make sense and are really strong work. And I can speak of many, including some work that we even just did around Standing Rock that has led to some of the most recent in the last couple of days barricades and resistance. So it's been really powerful. And at the core, currently we have staff. Our executive director serves as one of our trustees, but staff is at the center of our work. And in many ways that's great, and we're going to talk about that. It provides some nimbleness, but in many ways it's limited. We're not in the field. We're more on the funder side of things, and so I'm constantly looking for ways to reduce our influence. And I know that sounds a little odd to my philanthropic colleagues on the phone, but I'm trying to find ways to open up the process, trusting a more democratic understanding of grant making. And just to note, this is all in service to our grantee partners, and I take the word partnership very, very strong. So some early lessons learned with this model. First and foremost, in that CrossClass Giving Leadership Fund body, it's really working to not other the movement folks and particularly our grantee. And I know that sounds kind of obvious, but it's an interesting process that can quickly happen if we're not careful to really prioritize that person's voice in the decision and not discredit or to not make them be the only representative for our entire grantee portfolio, which is absolutely impossible to do. And so, we're constantly thinking about ways to ensure that the othering doesn't happen in that particular role, and thinking about, in fact, expanding it to another position just as another way to push back at that. I would say the other thing for our Leadership Fund Committee is we're trying to find ways that move the work from transactional to transformational. So we have this rich body of folks who have so much to add to this field and can make such great, smart decisions. I've said to myself before, if I won the lottery and was able to start a foundation, this group of folks would be the people I'd call and hire for program officers. It's really amazing to work with them. And how do we bring more out? How do we bring more of their strategy out and forward into the work that even gets ahead of the docket, that gets ahead of even the strategic development, but really influences the fundamental values that we have as an organization? So we're constantly thinking about ways to position the group, to bring forward members, to move them into a more transformational space. And like I noticed, staff has a lot of influence, and that provides us a ton of nimbleness, a ton of direction, but it's limited in its perspective and its targeting. And we're constantly trying to find ways to open up our funnel. As a new grant maker who is seeing or is wanting and desiring new grantee partners and can expand our portfolio, we're looking for ways to use our infrastructure in a more democratic fashion to do so. And I think there's, just to note at the very end, that there's a significant conversation that needs to be had around how you invest in the balance of power and information sharing. So between the investors, the board who is responsible for this work, and our trustees, how there's significant investment into just even bringing all those folks forward in information and understanding, but also them stepping into their own power and stepping back when they need to as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, I would say, in that space. So I'm going to share this with you. This is kind of takes the notion of democratization, or at least it's a feeble attempt to do so, but to take the notion of democratization out of kind of the theory and into some practice. And I should note that this is not yet fully approved by the different bodies that you saw in our management and governance. It's still draft. We're still tinkering with it. It's not final. But I felt comfortable, particularly with my colleagues at NFG, who I know wrestle with these issues, who are social justice funders themselves, or at least them approaching the work from a social justice lens. I felt comfortable sharing this with you all as just a spark of inspiration around how you can start to nail down some of the theoretical notions of democratic grant making or democratizing the grant making. And so what we have laid out here is, essentially a plan to really reduce staff influence by 30%. I think that's the kind of take-home numbers. Our general operating support grants out of the Leadership Fund are the largest part of our annual grant making. And I think over the next year, it's my hope that actually more referrals in 30% of the total annual docket doesn't come from staff, recommendations. It comes from recommendations from the field, from our trustees, from our board, and more. And so that's the kind of take-home metric. But what you can see here is we try to look at everybody, every pocket of influence within our organization, and say, how can you become more involved in the work that shapes your knowledge and nuance of it, and provide you greater opportunity to step into leadership. And our hope is that if they're stepping into leadership, they're stepping into recommendation and opening up that process and having ownership within that process. I can answer specific questions about this both online and offline, but I wanted to at least propose it to you as a way to land the wonderful theoretical work like people such as Jason Franklin are doing, the academic work, to this kind of shared value, and to now some key pieces that we're trying to implement over the next year to constantly open up our grant making. And again, this is all based off of the premise for us that finding ways to democratize our grant making is actually unlocking our real potential as a sector, right? Is actually unlocking the power of philanthropy to be our society's risk capital, and to really push a stronger sense or stronger core principle and value around justice, and drive work that is achieving equity and justice, and dare we even hope true liberation for the communities that need it the most.
Great, thanks Tyler for your presentation, and yeah, interesting slide. It's good to see how you are thinking through some of that work moving forward. I like the endpoints that you led into too, specifically about like one of our outcomes is looking at this process around the pool fund. There's really early stage of those conversations, and so some of the things in both presentations laid out the word participatory, how can it be utilized in that development. So thank you both for the presentation. I'm actually going to turn it to others that are on the call, and just wanted to generally, we try to get some input earlier on, but just wanted to know if anybody have any direct questions, or you can do it through the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Direct questions specifically about some of the things that you heard, but also thinking about the Democratizing Development Program itself. We're still going to be having more content, more information sharing, and things like that. Just kind of want to see in general, are there things that you want to ask directly to the speakers just for their input or insight? And I see Jerry, I think you're typing something now. So if others have a question, we want to just kind of open up the last part of the conversation just for questions or direct responses for what you heard today. And if you want to unmute yourself, now is the time to do so. I guess I'm just going to wait and see if there's any direct questions or responses. Well, while we're waiting, one thing that came up for me was just looking at the participatory budgeting model itself and some of the structure, and specifically around the engagement process. I found very, very interesting. I know that other working groups within NFG is also exploring it through the invest, divest work, looking at police department funding and things like that, how to divest from those things. So there's a good conversation happening across NFG's programs around this, and so I just wanted to also just thank you two both for kind of planting that seed to continue to have this conversation. And I see a couple questions here. Tyler, you see the question, can you talk a little bit more from Jerry from Ford, talk a little bit more about how your initiative institutionalized the shift in power dynamics within the decision-making process? Which is a great question. Not sure if you see that. You're on mute, Tyler.
There we go. Apologize about that. Thanks, Jerry, for that great question. It's always good to see you and hear you. Yeah, I think that is our goal around how we formally institutionalize this work. And in that chart that I shared, is kind of steps to doing so. Philanthropy in its traditional state is a tighter decision-making process, particularly in private and family foundations. Community foundations have different requirements for grant making and decisions around grant making, but particularly for private and family philanthropies, which is where a majority of the philanthropic resources are, that's, I think, the biggest question. And so what we tried to take steps at doing was finding deeper engagement with different parts of our governance structure as a way to, for this first next year, build at least awareness of all of the different pockets of power. And with that awareness, our hope is then that it becomes, that we can then build off of that and actually start to shift and almost move and contour power within the organization in a way that actually points it further and further to our grantees and our trustees who represent both the movement and philanthropic fields. And so, this next year is really focused on referrals, on awareness, on education. And I didn't share the year 2 or 3 goals because I think those are a little bit even more aspirational, where we have grantees doing some flow funding, or part of our leadership fund committee actually having dollars themselves that they're able to move just purely outside of staff reach or control, maybe some influence, but certainly not at the level of control. And so those are even, I think, greater understandings around how you kind of unlock these different pockets of power. And then the field funder dynamics is a really interesting question, and one that, we're trying to even tackle further. That a little bit of that is around the othering, because it's quickly can the field defer to the funder in a strategic question, or quickly can those from the field who rely on philanthropy to support their great work, defer to whatever it is philanthropy wants to see, whatever the funder wants to see. And so we've had to take some real steps to ensure that that power imbalance is as minimized as possible. It can't ever go away. It's inherent to the sector, fortunately or unfortunately, mostly unfortunately. But what we can do is name it, call it out, and be really clear about when this is an opportunity for the field to lead, and that for most of our conversations and most of our strategic decisions and even the proposal decisions, really setting up the field to lead the conversation and lead the vote, quite frankly. And so that's been tough in some ways because it itself puts them out front, and there's some vulnerability with that. But by staff stepping in and showing support and ensuring that that's not done in a way that others them, I think we've seen some early success in that.
Great, thanks for that. There's also a question from Rachel Humphrey. Instilling the value of being in service to grantees as foundational, like how difficult, the difficulty around that. I'm not sure if you see that question there.
I do. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, that's a great question. I actually never had someone ask me that, and I'd have to think about that. I think because we're not only a foundation, has that notion been easier to adopt. What I mean by that is my previous work, I worked for an organization where the money only went one way, right? Only went out. And here in our organization, we have money that comes in, money that goes out, money that is committed for a long term. And so the flow of influence and power is greater in some ways and more diverse. And so fundamentally, we were set up in what is otherwise a pretty crowded space. I mean, the environmental community has a lot of organizations, particularly climate change issues, to not be duplicative, but to instead stand behind so others who have real power can step forward and be of support to their work. And so we have this inherent value as an organization. You know, we constantly talk about what's ours to do and what's theirs to do, and you know, but to step back and really let them lead. And so to name that it's foundational in support of the grantees was not all that difficult to do. I think the early founding of the organization as one that wasn't going to take the next line of credit or wasn't going to be out front on some of these things like we see in other kind of nonprofit spaces really lent itself to that value coming forward.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And great question, Rachel. There was a question also for Josh from Jess. I'm not sure if you see that question, Josh. You got it?
Yeah, I got it.
Awesome.
So is PB always invited by the boss or person with power within an organization? And how could it be brought into organizations where mid-level staff are interested in the method that might face some resistance? And how we decide who to work with and not. Yeah, as far as who initiates it, we see a mix ranging from elected officials to city staff at different levels to community organizations. So in places like in Vallejo, it was the city council member. In Buffalo, community organization, Clean Air Coalition, moved PB forward and kind of pushed staff and board, and they became champions. And the key that we've seen, I think, is just having at least one person who's really committed to it and who can be a champion. But that can be from different places. How it can be brought into organizations where mid-level staff are interested. We've had questions about this, actually. The last time that we presented on our own PB process, there was a kind of mid-level staff from another organization we work with who was very interested. And I think one approach that we've seen is to pilot this with one program area or project or team and test it out and see for that fund or project, can this work? And that allows you to start small to work with a more defined stakeholder group. And there's a bit less of a stake for the organization, but also an opportunity to try something new in that team. And especially if there's teams or individuals that really do get this process and are committed to it and want to experiment in that way. And then, yeah, the resistance, I mean, if there are folks who are not supportive of community engagement, we've found it pretty hard to win them over. I think a lot of the questions that we get that are more surmountable are about how much work this takes and is this worth the effort? And because it is a lot more work to engage hundreds or thousands of people than just a handful. And what we see and what we try and echo back is the long-term benefits that this can bring. So not starting on projects that you're going to get pushed back on later or that you're going to find weren't the best investment of your resources. Getting broader ideas that can inform broader policy making. And so it's not just about what you're deciding through PB, but also creating a space for broad positive input of what people do want as opposed to reacting against what you're putting forward. And then building more relationships of trust and investment. And I think the folks who've done it have seen those long-term benefits, like that's been helpful for them. Speaking to peers who've done it elsewhere, if you can bring in someone who's been through the process, who came in with that skepticism, and can talk about what they learned and what they got out of the process, whether it's a funder or an official or an organization. And then the last question here was how we decide who to work with and who not to work with. That's a problem that we're, I guess, fortunate to increasingly have. For a while, the question was more just, will anyone do this? And now a bunch of folks have done it, and we can be a bit more selective. We really want to make sure that whoever is launching the process has a commitment to equity. They have a commitment to collaboration between government and the community, so that there's a space at the table for community groups to design and oversee the process, and we put that up front. So establishing those basic commitments, those values at the beginning, and if folks don't share those values, then we don't think it's going to be a great collaboration. there's lots of other questions that could get into more as far as how this can be a model for broader funding streams. So our work with HUD, for example, we've been thinking about that a lot as far as what pilot programs can shift much bigger pots of money at the federal level, what kinds of demonstration projects are going to be most convincing to other program areas or other funders. So yeah, those are some great questions.
Great. So thank you so much, Josh and Tyler. I don't see we have any other questions on the chat, but I just want to encourage everyone just in terms of the next step. We're definitely going to share kind of any other additional information that both Josh and Tyler have, but also Matt Hart, who was unable to make it, his information around who decides, looking at the philanthropic sector with a couple case studies. We're going to kind of continue to kind of build on this conversation. So pretty much just stay tuned. But also encourage others, if you have any other questions or comments or want to get in touch with anybody, please just let me know. We can make that connection as well. So with that said, I think unless Tyler or Josh, you have any last points or thoughts or anything like that before we close?
Some more folks are typing in the chat box, and if anyone had additional questions.
Oh, are they? Okay. I think Ricardo typing? Oh. As soon as I said that, he started
I think
typing.
Jerry had a question.
Oh, I'm thinking mine is coming up slow. Okay, great. All right, got it, Jerry. You see that one? What happened? Right when you're about to close. Anyway, I think in terms of, I saw a couple of questions pop up, and do you still see them, Shannon, or if there's any other?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, great. Well, anyway, obviously, everyone that's on this call, we can always talk more about this. Like I said, this is just a seed to looking at some of the kind of participatory structures, the natures of the conversations around the program, around looking at the outcome 3 of the work that we're looking at in the program. As we're exploring kind of the next steps in that work, we want to look at other, examples, case studies by the Solutions Project, the work that you're doing, and others. So this is like an opportunity just to kind of plant that seed, but we hope to continue to have more conversation about this as we move forward. And like I mentioned, Josh and Tyler, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and helping us lead us in this discussion. I also want to thank Shannon Lynn, who is our program associate at NFG, who's pretty much been managing all the background things. Oh, slideshow lost, and she brings it back to life. So thank you so much for that work. But also thank all the people that joined the call as well. Really look forward to continue working with you all around the pool fund work, but also in general, all the place-based initiative work that we got going at NFG and through the Democratizing Development Program. So thank you all so much. Everyone has a great day.